The burning of Islam's holy book, the Quran, in the United States last month has sparked violent protests across Afghanistan. It's the worst violence the country has seen in months. Who's really behind it? And what does this mean for the international presence in this war-torn country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. It began with the burning of the Quran by an American pastor. The US president called it an act of extreme intolerance and bigotry. But Obama also criticized the violent protests in Afghanistan the action has sparked, in which at least a dozen people have been killed. Protests have spread to the main southern Afghan city of Kandahar, the spiritual heartland of the Taliban. That incident took place a day after 7 UN staff were among 14 people killed in the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif. They overwhelmed guards at the UN compound before setting it ablaze. It was the worst attack on the world body since the 2001 US-led invasion. Last year, Pastor Terry Jones drew condemnation over his aborted plan to burn copies of the Quran on the anniversary of the September 11, 2001 attacks on the US. A top UN official has blamed the pastor for the violence that erupted in Afghanistan. And questions are now being asked over where this leaves the US-led efforts to bring stability to the country. US President Barak Obama extended his condolences to the families of those killed by the protesters and said the desecration of any holy text, including the Quran, is an act of extreme intolerance and bigotry. However, he also said, but that does not justify attacking and killing innocent people, and there is no justification for such a dishonorable and deplorable act. Well, the 7 foreigners killed at the UN compound included 4 Nepalese guards. The other 3 were identified as Swedish, Norwegian and Romanian. Stefan de Mistura, the UN Special Envoy to Afghanistan, said the organization had no plans to pull out of the country.
Our redeployment is temporary, and it is here to Kabul, not outside of Afghanistan. The office has been destroyed. We need to reestablish that one. But I believe we are going to reassess the situation based on the security every month. But for the time being, I can state clearly the UN stays.
Well, from their side, the Taliban have accused Afghan security forces of killing unarmed demonstrators. They said in an official statement, Afghan forces under the order of the foreign forces attacked unarmed people during the protests, killing them and arresting some, saying there were armed people among these protesters, which was not true. Well, joining me now to talk more about this, in Kabul, Prince Ali Siraj, president of the National Coalition for Dialogue with the Tribes of Afghanistan. In London, Phil Rees, journalist and the author of Dining with Terrorists. And in Washington, D.C., Doug Bandow, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, specializing in foreign policy and civil liberties. Mr. Bandow also worked as a special assistant to former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, we should point out. Gentlemen, welcome all 3 of you to the program. Prince Ali Siraj in Kabul, if I could start with you. Now, it's well known, it's well documented, the religious sensibilities in Afghanistan, and clearly someone like Terry Jones has chosen to exploit that. But what do you think was behind this violence? Was it people, was it local Afghans, or was it foreign elements, as some people have said?
The way it materialized, it's my personal feeling that this was pre-planned. The Quran was burnt over a month ago, and then 1 month later, the demonstration started in Mazar. The demonstration that started in Mazar was, I believe, very strongly was done at the instigation of the enemies of Afghanistan and the enemies, like the foreign Taliban and the Al-Qaeda. For them to pick up a foreign organization like the United Nations and make a beeline for that particular building tells me that this is something that is not planned by the Afghan people, but was pre-planned. And the fact that the building was attacked with, these people came with weapons. Which means it was pre-planned for them to go ahead and create this kind of a problem, to go in there and kill individuals within the United Nations compound. This is just to make the world feel that the Afghan people are turning against the coalition and the Afghans are becoming anti-American or anti-coalition force in Afghanistan. Nothing can be farther than the truth. The governor of Mazar has already arrested 30 people. The investigation is going on, and we will wait to see. I'm sure at the end of the day, we will find out that there were insurgents among the demonstrators, and these are the ones who instigated the problem in Mazar.
So, Phil Rees, it's been 10 years since foreign forces entered Afghanistan. What does this say about the state of the international mission there?
Well, I don't think that these demonstrations need to be organized, because I think the anger that is genuinely felt by the Afghan people over an incident like this. Now, it may have been sparked by some people, I don't know. But remember, Mazar-e-Sharif is an area where the Taliban have very little power. It's not their heartland at all. And I think it just shows that when the Taliban describe the foreign occupation as sort of infidels, it echoes with these people. They do feel angry. And I think that, you know, when I've traveled through parts of Afghanistan, this type of attitude is not something that needs to be instigated by a small group of Taliban. It can actually be felt by the people there and resonate with them. So, you know, while I don't know whether there was a small group who set it up, if there are, they're organizing it very well, because it's spreading all through the country.
Doug Bandow, what do you believe this says about the international mission in Afghanistan? And does this attack simply reflect the animosity that many Afghans have for a foreign presence on their soil?
I think it shows the problems of a foreign occupation. Whether or not it represents, you know, the majority of Afghans, it certainly represents some of them. I mean, there have been protests before. I mean, in Kabul after a traffic accident, I mean, given, you know, if you go to Kabul, the overpowering Western presence and kind of militarized presence, it offends people. I think, you know, Mazar, it's very worrisome. I traveled there last year. Mazar is one of the cities I felt fairly safe in. You know, to see this kind of action, again, I don't know who promoted it, but certainly somebody on the ground was willing to engage in these activities. And I think it shows the US and the Allied powers, after 10 years, there are very real tensions there. And it's very hard to maintain an occupation for so long, you know, without people growing upset.
Yeah, Prince Ali Siraj, I mean, Doug Bandow in Washington makes the point there that this happened in Mazar-e-Sharif, or this began in Mazar-e-Sharif, a part of Afghanistan that has been relatively peaceful. Does that surprise you? And again, what does that say about the state of security in the country as a whole?
First of all, let me make one thing very clear, is that the demonstration in Mazar, which was because of the burning of the Holy Quran, this type of demonstrations is nothing new to Afghanistan. We have always demonstrated against other type of situations, like when the Afghans were killed in Iran. There were, you know, hundreds of people demonstrating in front of the Iranian embassy, and nobody attacked the Iranian embassy or killed any Iranian embassy officials. You know, we have to make this clear, that this demonstration has got nothing to do with the coalition forces being in Afghanistan. This has got to do solely with the fact that the Afghans are very protective of their religion. And anybody, look at the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union entered Afghanistan, the people immediately retaliated against the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was considered as a non-believer, a country with no God. And people reacted against that because they didn't want to be occupied by somebody who did not believe in a religion or in God. So this is nothing new to Afghans to retaliate, to demonstrate when their religion is threatened. But never have they gone to kill somebody the way it was done in Mazar. In Mazar, it was pre-planned. Unfortunately, the security was not, I mean, there was a shortfall in security around the United Nations compound. When the demonstrations started, the foreign organizations or the government should have taken immediate action to protect the foreign organizations. This apparently was not done. And, but I'm sure that with the United Nations guards and even the soldiers in Afghanistan could not even believe that they were among the demonstrators. There are people carrying weapons, and when you carry a weapon, you're carrying it with an intention of doing something. You don't carry weapons just because, you know, they want to carry it. The security was lax. I think This shows that we need to do more with the security system in Afghanistan. We have to train our soldiers and our policemen a great deal more. We have to equip them properly. You know, by allowing the Afghan National Army to take responsibility for the security of Afghanistan, they cannot do it with a machine gun driving in the back of a Toyota truck. They don't have helicopters, they don't have heavy weapons, they do not have tanks, they do not have armored cars. So it's too much to ask of the Afghan security forces to maintain security in an area with just holding a machine gun in their hands.
Phil Rees, just putting aside the issue of the sensitivities inside Afghanistan over insults to Islam, as Prince Ali Siraj was talking about there, what is this? Where does this leave the security situation in Afghanistan right now, especially when you consider the fact that this has gone on, as I said, for 10 years now? But surely you have to question the level of security right now with acts like this. Can we even talk about a troop withdrawal in a few years?
Well, interestingly, it was only about 10 days ago that President Karzai announced that Mazar-e-Sharif was going to be one of the areas whereby the Western forces would hand over security to the Afghan National Army, to the ANA. And I think this does show the problems of the ANA. I mean, how, you know, the central core of what the West is trying to do is not defeat the Taliban now. I think they have to accept that there's going to be some kind of political solution. But what they're trying to do, and this is the core of what Obama's trying to do, is effectively create an Afghan national army that can do the job for them, even though there'll be some American bases permanently in the country. Now, the problem is that you've got infiltrators. You've got what happened when Nixon tried to do this in Vietnam, for example, to create a South Vietnamese army to defend itself against the North. And what it found was that there were a lot of communist sympathizers in the army. So just as these people may be instigating this trouble yesterday, they are part of the Afghan culture. They're a significant part of it, even if they're just 15, 20%. That's enough to sustain an insurgency, and I think make the Western policy doomed to failure.
Doug Bandow, you concur with that? Is the policy there led by the U.S. doomed to failure? Should they have been there that long?
I think it's hard to justify having U.S. forces, you know, in Afghanistan 10 years after going in. You know, the American people supported it because they were, you know, angry at having had the attacks of 9/11. You know, the view that the Taliban regime had hosted training camps for terrorists. But if you ask Americans today what the U.S. is trying to do, they really don't understand. It's one thing to protect American security and go after terrorists. It's another thing to try to create kind of a democratic state, a central government, a military in another country, you know, 10 years on, where it looks like, you know, that's a very hard thing to do. Very different culture, very different region. I think American political support is waning. I think the president, he faces re-election next year. I don't think he wants to be seen as maintaining this, you know, occupation, this, you know, conflict indefinitely. So I don't see how this works out. I don't think the U.S. has the time in terms of political will to keep troops there on and on. Yeah, and episodes like this, I think, give impetus to the idea that the U.S. really needs to accelerate an exit, not prolong an exit.
But what worries, I mean, Doug Bandow, what worries many people in the United States who have supported the U.S.-led actions in Afghanistan is this idea of cutting and running. To get out now would be an admission of defeat and would send the wrong message to other enemies of the United States around the world.
Well, the problem, of course, is that argument has been used in every dumb war America's gotten into. I mean, the U.S. got itself into a war in Iraq, I think, largely on false pretenses, for bad purposes, and came up with catastrophic results. And that argument was used there. It was used in Vietnam. I mean, the problem for the United States is it's very hard to go to the American people and say, I'm going to have more Americans die simply because I don't want to admit that a previous president made a mistake. And I think that's the problem, is that while there are advocates of that position, we've got to stay tough. I think the American people are saying, you know, we're essentially bankrupt at home. People have been dying there for years. The U.S. is now engaged in its third war, I mean, in Libya, you know, that we can't afford this. And so I think that argument is going to be a very hard one to maintain, especially with the political campaign that's going to be heating up next year.
Prince Ali Siraj, do you fear that more of this is likely to happen in your country in the future?
I'd like to make certain statements. I think there's a great deal of misunderstanding as to why the Americans and NATO forces are in Afghanistan. The American people should ask themselves this question: what are the Americans doing and doing in Afghanistan and dying in Afghanistan? They're not dying for the benefit of the Afghan people alone. They are there because a certain group of people called Al-Qaeda, who were staying in Afghanistan, they perpetrated the bringing down of two towers in the United States. Those very people who are not only the enemies of the Afghan people, but who are enemies of civilized world per se, are still in Afghanistan and in the vicinity of Afghanistan and Pakistan and in the region, also towards Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Chechnya. So we have to make a decision on what we want to do, where we want to make a stand against a common enemy. If we are living in the middle of the forest and we hear that there is a fire at the edge of the forest, do we wait? Do we go there to put out that fire? Or are we going to wait that fire to come to our front door to burn our house down? This fight is not for Afghanistan alone. This fight is for the region. This fight is for the security of the future of the United States and the European nations. We have to keep this in our minds, that the money that's being spent by NATO and the United States and other nations in Afghanistan, and where children of Afghanistan and the Americans and the Canadians and the coalition forces are dying, they are dying for a cause. They are dying to make sure that people like the Al-Qaeda will not have the opportunity to come and destroy us down the road.
But there are those who will say that Al-Qaeda is largely disappeared from Afghanistan, and if you talk about the problem being Al-Qaeda, most of them have gone over to Pakistan.
No, that again is a mistake. The Al-Qaeda is very much alive. The only thing is that they have changed their uniform and they have changed their dress code. They no longer call themselves Al-Qaeda, they call themselves Talibs. There are three types of Talibs operating in Afghanistan today. You got the radicals, which come from outside of Afghanistan, the mercenaries who are Afghans who are working for money, and the white Talib, as I call them, in Afghanistan, who are fighting because of corruption, because of hunger, because of poverty, and so on and so forth. The mercenaries and the white Talibs are Afghans from Afghan tribes. And if the coalition forces and the Americans, which they're doing now, incidentally, where they are trying to bring security in Afghanistan by using the people, by going to the tribes and asking the tribes to take responsibility for their region, this is something that should have been done 8 years ago. Unfortunately, it was not done. After 8 years, now the coalition and the United States have come to the conclusion, as I've always been saying this on this program, that unless we empower the people of Afghanistan to take responsibility for their own security, we are not going to succeed. Now the NATO forces and the United States have come to that conclusion that they need the support of the people, and their programs right now being implemented, and all we have to do is to be patient for these programs to be implemented within the regions of Afghanistan, and you will see a completely different situation. Give the people the responsibility of protecting their families, their land, but you cannot do it by just walking away from them. You have to help them economically. You have to help them so that they can develop and they can build their lives, and they can build their villages and their communities, which was totally destroyed over these past 30 years.
All right, let's put some of that to Phil Rees in London. Clearly, Prince Ali Siraj believes that there are very good reasons for the US-led coalition to remain in Afghanistan, and he talks about the fear that many legitimate elements who want to build a democracy in Afghanistan will be left behind if the US-led coalition chooses to pack up and leave.
Well, one thing that must be remembered, though, is that the Taliban are a part of Afghanistan. Prince Ali speaks as if somehow they're an alien force. Yes, there are some foreign fighters with them, but they have strong support certainly amongst the Pashtuns. And as I said earlier, even if it's just 20 or 30% support. And remember, there's another belief throughout Afghanistan that the West is going to leave, which also helps the Taliban, because it does mean that people don't want to stand up to them because they realize that their long-term interests must be linked to them. So you cannot talk about them as if they are some some external force. They are a part of the fabric of any future Afghanistan society. So we've got to say, how are we going to deal with that? At present, this military strategy is failing completely. A British parliamentary report recently said, yes, there must be talks with the Taliban. The American government have not officially recognized that, but they virtually have. And in practice, I think the end goal now is to have talks with the Taliban, and that any military endeavors now are simply there to improve the bargaining position of NATO before they leave. So I think that's the reality of the situation that we're facing.
All right, let's send that back to Prince Ali Siraj briefly. The Taliban are here to stay, whether anybody likes it or not. What do you say to that?
I don't agree. Totally.
Tell
I mean, when you say that the Taliban are Afghans and they're the Afghan problem, the gentleman has got very little information as to what's actually going on inside the country. Over 60% of the population of Afghanistan are supporting the coalition forces in Afghanistan. Over 60% of the people in Afghanistan are supporting their government and their president. The situation is that we are completely we have disregarded the people of Afghanistan for the past 8 years. We have not done anything to help the people of Afghanistan economically.
Phil Reese, you want to respond?
But why do we see the scenes, Prince Ali, in Mazar-e-Sharif? I mean, the kind of anger that we've seen with the burning of the Quran reflects an anger towards foreign forces there.
This has got nothing to do with the foreign forces. This has got to do with religion. My uncle, King Amanullah, had to abdicate the throne in 1929 because he was trying to bring Afghanistan from the Dark Ages into the 20th century. And by removing the veil in Afghanistan, they called him an infidel, and they started the revolution with the, I mean, as the British understand this very well. They instigated a revolution against King Amanullah, who had to leave Afghanistan and live in exile for the rest of his life. But again, religion was the main cause of that. In the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, religion was the cause of that. If Afghans were so much anti-coalition and anti-America and anti the British, over 37 members of civilians were killed in Kandahar over a month ago. If there would have been any kind of a demonstration, the people would have gotten up, picked up arms against the coalition force at that time. The number of civilians that have been killed as collateral damage.
All right, I want to turn back to Doug Bandow on this for what is probably going to be the last word here, given the amount of time that we have left. But I just want to hear from you. How do you see this playing out? I mean, I know that you were opposed to this, to the US-led actions in Afghanistan, and you see no point to it right now. But President Obama's administration has a timetable for withdrawal. Given the current security situation there, do you believe that they can stick to that?
I think they have to. The president's made a commitment. The U.S. is stuck in a third war, which could go on. People are talking stalemate in Libya. And the challenge is the Afghan people don't like the Taliban. I think the majority don't, but that doesn't mean they like President Karzai and the government. I mean, the skepticism about the ANA and especially the Afghan National Police is overwhelming. So the challenge is very hard, and I don't think this administration wants to make a long-term commitment, which is what we're talking about in terms of nation building. It's very different from trying to deal with al-Qaeda. It's a very different commitment. I think this president is desperate to demonstrate to the American people he's serious about drawing down the U.S. presence.
Phil Reese, what ultimately are the biggest obstacles to peace in Afghanistan? Is it simply the international presence there?
It's a very fractious society. It has been obviously the whole of Afghanistan's history as a nation. But I think that the foreign presence is a problem now. And indeed, the problem needs to be sorted out by the Afghan people themselves. I mean, I would certainly agree with Prince Ali on that, and it needs to be working with the tribal systems and within their culture. And whether we like it or not, Afghans they know their history. They've fought the British, they've fought the Russians. One Taliban person told me, we'll fight the Chinese again, looking forward to another war with them. So they almost like, and they're proud of it, and they know their history, by the way, a lot more than Western politicians seem to.
All right,
so I think that really the West has to
be the last word. We are
out
of time, gentlemen, but I want to thank all three of you for taking part in the discussion. Prince Ali Siraj, Phil Reese, and Doug Bandow. Many thanks for your time, gentlemen. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Hazem Sika. From all of us on the team, bye for now.